G'day everyone, I'm David Reidy. Welcome to Piano Finally, a podcast by an old bloke who's getting around to learning the piano. Finally. Welcome to show 30. Thank you for taking the time to listen. If this is the first time you're hearing the podcast, I hope you enjoy what's here. And if you're a returning listener, thanks very much for coming back. Either way, let me know if you're learning the piano or another musical instrument and how you're going with it. You can contact me at david@pianofinally.show. Also, welcome to 2025. This is the first episode of the new year. In the last episode, I looked back at what had happened in the first year I have been learning the piano. This week, I'll look at where I'm heading. Don't forget that the National Chopin Piano Competition is underway in Miami in the United States. I watched the first preliminary rounds early this morning, and of course there was a lot of very accomplished piano playing. The competition has 23 competitors, so each of the preliminary round concerts consists of 6 pianists in alphabetical order, with the first, Paul G., chosen randomly. Ben Laude of the Chopin Podcast is hosting the live streams. He introduces each contestant and occasionally has a chat during the intermissions and after a performance. The chat I watched with Anthony Ratinov seemed mostly unplanned and was an interesting insight into his playing. In Sydney, the live streams are at 5 a.m. and 11 a.m. each day until the finals, and they're worth a watch if you're free then. Of course, they'll still be available on YouTube long after the competition is finished. I'm not watching every moment of the competition, but having it on in the background while getting other things done is proving to be pleasant. I had been hearing about the Rest is History podcast on several other of the podcasts I listen to, and last week I finally got around to having a listen myself. Completely by chance, the 2 most recent episodes were something special. Typically, the shows involved the 2 hosts, Tom Holland and Dominic Sandbrook, talking over aspects of history. But in these 2 episodes, they are joined by the Academy of St. Martin in the Fields to discuss the lives of Mozart and Beethoven. If you already know the lives of these 2 composers, there is probably not a lot of new information. The podcast is, after all, aimed at the general public, not musicians. But the way the hosts tell the story still makes it an enjoyable listen. By looking at 2 composers whose working lives overlapped briefly, Tom and Dominic are able to build a narrative about the changing role of the composer in the royal courts of the time. They briefly look back at Bach, who was basically just a servant, through Mozart's move to work independently, to Beethoven, who demanded to be treated as an equal to his employers. It's an interesting tale and an insight into how music was made in the late 18th and early 19th centuries. These episodes of the podcast, rather than being recorded in a studio, were recorded in the Royal Albert Hall, and clearly the audio engineers knew what they were doing, as the recordings of the music are great. You're not going to hear anything surprising. The selections used to illustrate parts of the story are all well-known pieces, expertly performed by the orchestra, soloists and choir. Of course, as with many shows about Beethoven, the second episode concludes with the ending of the Ninth Symphony. These 2 episodes are well worth a listen, and the podcast itself is amongst many people's favourites. I'm planning on adding it to my regular downloads. It's the beginning of a new year of piano learning, and I'm going to attempt to make some plans, fully aware of the fact that it is likely that what I plan and what actually happens over the next 12 months are only going to bear a passing relationship to each other. There are a couple of things that are set. The Battle of the Bands at school is scheduled for the 27th of June, and the current plan is to have Adele's Someone Like You ready to go by then. I and the rest of the group are going to need some decent rehearsal time before that. I'll see how easy it is to get a bunch of Year 12 students organised. I'm going to be continuing my lessons with Debbie throughout the year. We start again at the beginning of February. I hope to move on to some of the more advanced pieces in the Ansgar repertoire books and continue with the chord work for pop music playing. I also want to do the AMEB Level 3 theory exam before school returns in Term 1. I also want to have something I can play at Debbie's student recital towards the end of the year. Other than that, I really like Stephen Sondheim musicals, so I wouldn't mind learning some of the piano arrangements for some of his pieces. In the long term also, I want to replace the piece of the crab cannon I use in the podcast with one that I play on a piano keyboard rather than a computer keyboard. I also want to explore a bit more about composition. I have bought Guy Mitchell Moore's composition course and plan to get to that later in the year after I finish the harmony course. I don't have plans to become a composer, but I'd like to better understand the process that goes into making a piece of music. Along the way, I'm also hoping it will lead to more knowledge about the way orchestral instruments interact. So, those are my plans. What are yours? Do you plan out where you're headed on your musical journey? I'm learning because I like learning, and because I'd like to be able to make people happy by being able to make some music. I know others have much more elaborate plans than that. Let me know what your plans are. I think it's important to get them out of your head and onto paper, or at least to share them with others so that we can make better decisions based on where we'd like to head. Does it matter that, in the end, you end up in a completely different situation than the one you had planned? No. Learning any musical instrument and getting more music into your life is truly a case where the journey is much more important than the destination. It has been a year of buying things so that I can learn to play the piano. I haven't added up how much I've spent, and I don't intend to, but I'm not planning on spending much more on equipment, although I might still buy books and scores. I'm pretty happy with the setup I have now, both my current learning and for some new things I want to try. So I thought it might be a good idea to review those things that are working well for me. This week, I'll begin with an overview and then over the next few weeks, look at some of the bits in more detail. The centerpiece of my equipment is the Kawai NV10 hybrid grand piano. All the literature I had read about piano learning stressed the importance of the feel of the keys and their action, and that acoustic pianos had a different feel to the keyboards on digital instruments. The NV10, however, has the same mechanism as Kawai's acoustic grand pianos, so the feel is identical, even if the sound is slightly different. The NV10 has an inbuilt sound system, but I discovered the Pianotech software from ModArt, and it has a range of piano simulators, including the Shigeru Kawai SKEX that the NV10 is modelled on. It also includes Steinways, Bösendorfers, and a range of other instruments, giving me a wider range of things to play. I'm using the current version of the software, which is version 8. Using Pianotech means that a computer is needed. I'm using one of the new Mac Minis from Apple. I have the M4 Pro version, which is considerably overpowered for the job of piano emulation. I also use it for editing the podcast and working with Cubase and Dorico, so the extra power of the Pro chip is worth it. The Mac Mini is connected to an LG 5K display. You can use Pianotech with a smartphone or tablet, but not with as much flexibility as you can with a computer. The digital output of the Mac Mini goes to a Rode Rodecaster 2 audio interface and mixer. I'll cover the Rodecaster in more detail when discussing the equipment I use to make the podcast episodes. The Rodecaster's audio output goes to a set of Adam T5V speakers with a T10S subwoofer. The speakers are set on stands behind the Kawai with the subwoofer on the floor underneath. This gives a very nice sound field, especially when using Pianotech in player mode, where it emulates sitting at the piano. The whole setup gives me a really nice sound and feel for playing the piano. Although it's electronic at its core, the Kawai's grand piano action is the same as if I'd spent a lot more money on a piano, and the Pianotech software not only sounds great, it offers the flexibility to play a Steinway Concert Grand or a Yamaha Upright if the music calls for that. I'll include links to the equipment mentioned in this section. They're not affiliate links, but let me know if you use any of my suggestions. If you're buying hardware, I encourage you to support your local music store rather than head to Amazon or somewhere like that. If you're around Sydney, I bought my gear from Manny's, Turramurra Music, and the Carlingford Music Centre, and I can recommend all three. Next week, I'll look at the newest equipment I've acquired, a MIDI controller and DAW software. Well, that's it for this week. If you'd like to contact me, email is the best way. You'll find me at david@pianofinally.show and the website at www.pianofinally.show. In both cases, Piano Finally is all one word. The show is also on Facebook and Instagram and available as audio only on YouTube. You can subscribe via any popular iOS or Android podcast application or from directories such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. I also post an excerpt and link to each episode as an Instagram reel. If you're learning an instrument, let me know where you are in your journey. What's going well and what are the challenges? And so, until the next episode, I hope your piano stays in tune and you enjoy your time at the keys. I'm again going to include 3 pieces in this week's progress. The first is Fritz Spindler's Canon. I use it as the piece I play when I want to hear what something sounds like with one of the instruments on the key lab. Finally, I'm able to play the piece with both the articulation and dynamics working together. Now it moves on to reinforcement, which means I play it through twice only in each practice session, leaving a bit more time to concentrate on other pieces. The second piece is the Bagatelle in F by Daniel Gottlob Turk. It's a Liszt B piece in the Ansgar book. It's almost even and at the right tempo, so it's time to start concentrating more on the dynamics and the articulation. The third piece is Afternoon Snooze by Andrew Craggs from the Ansgar Preparatory List C. This is only the first 6 bars, but it's both hands, although the left is only playing 4 chords. The right hand is working well, the left not so much. All the recordings were made using the Kawai NV10 as the keyboard and Pianotech 8 running on the M4 Pro Mac Mini. Pianotech is set to the new Suguru Kawai SKEX in player mode.